Hello and welcome to this video, and I've called this video Today I'll be showing you 250 slides and they all look like this. Now I'm sure we've all been in this position. You've been to a presentation and you've seen slides that look something like this and you're really bored by the presentation, and sometimes when the presentation starts like this you're bored by the presentation before it actually begins. Especially when it's in another language, it becomes more and more difficult to listen to. Now this is what commentators often call death by PowerPoint, and if you look at the internet you'll find thousands and thousands of references to death by PowerPoint. Now you're not actually going to probably die from watching a presentation, but you'll certainly be bored, you'll certainly stop paying attention, you'll certainly begin to feel very sleepy, and you won't be listening to the content and taking in the message of the presentation. So what I'd like to do in this video is look at some questions around visual aids and get you thinking about visual aids and helping you to design better visual aids for your presentations. So the first question we've got is, well, why do we use visual aids in presentations? Well, visual aids, the key is in the word aid. Aid means to help, and visual aids are there to support you as a presenter. Now, if they're there to support you, they're not there to do the presentation for you. They're not there to have all the details and all the data on the slides so that you can just turn around and read from the slides. The aids should be there in order to give meaning to your content, in some ways to sometimes simplify the content. So for example, if I'm not a doctor, I don't know very much about medicine, if I went to a presentation and I was watching a doctor present about a very complex operation, then that person using visual aids to simplify the content and make the content meaningful and interesting to me will make the presentation message come across to me. So that's the first thing. Visual aids are certainly a support. They're there to make your presentation better, not to make your presentation worse. They're there to make you better as a presenter and not to make you a worse presenter. Now, I often think of visual aids, what helps me is I think of them as some kind of backdrop to my presentation. They're there in order to clarify my message. Or another thing that really helps me is thinking of them as giving another dimension to my presentation that will really help me to go into another universe and to really get my message across to the people who are listening to me. Now, another key is in the word visual. It's a visual aid, and it should appeal to the visual, to your eyes, to the visual senses. And this is why pictures and things like this will really help you, and simplification will really, really help you. A certain amount of people in any audience that you're speaking to, they'll be very visual people. They'll tend to take in information in a visual way, and you'll be really appealing to those kind of people. Visual aid, you can actually add this to, or visual information, you can add it to cognitive information. So by putting in visual information, you'll be expanding the cognitive load rather than adding to cognitive overload and giving people too much information, too much information, too much information. Visual aids as well, they give you the chance, you can be very metaphorical in your content and be very symbolic in your content. We've also learned in other videos that metaphors really help people to communicate. So visual aids, again, they're not something that should be boring, they're not something that should take away from attention, they're there to really help you, support you, and make your message much better. So this brings me on to the next question, which leads on from the first question, which is the inclusion of all details and data on visual aids desirable and professional. Now, some people certainly think this, and it's something that they've learned. It can depend on the amount of training that they've had for presentations. It can depend on the presentations they've seen from other people. It can depend on the company that they're working in. But in general, my answer to this is no, no, no. We already said in the first question, visual aids are not a substitute for content. If you include lots of details and lots of data on your visual aids, your audience members, the people listening to your presentation, will spend all their time looking, if they're paying attention at all, they'll be looking at your visual aids and trying to understand them and take in the content that's on their visual aids. The second this happens, you lose your power as a presenter. What people are doing is looking at the visual aids and they're not listening to you as a presenter, and they're not listening to the message that you're given. Too much detail and too much data is too much information. If we talk about visual aids, think about all the time being clear, clarity, 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 and think about simplifying, simplification, simplification, simplification. Any visual aid that you use should be, when it's put up, it should be instantly understandable by the people who are listening to your presentation. And again, this is something to bear in mind as a presenter. When you're presenting the presentation, or indeed if it's a presentation that you've given many, many, many times, then you could have seen the slide 100 times, maybe even 1,000 times. Maybe you're really comfortable with the information and you're really familiar with the information that you're including on the presentation slide. But what you have to remember for your presentation audience is that they're seeing the slide for the first time. And that means you don't want them to spend all their time trying to understand what the slide is all about rather than listening to you. Any slide, any visual aid that you use, it should be instantly understandable, or you should make the meaning clear very, very quickly in your presentation. So then we come on to the next question, which is about presentation and handouts. And the question is there an argument that a presentation handout should be a different document to the presentation slides? My answer to this would be yes, yes, yes. I think if you prepare a beautifully designed presentation with beautiful visual aids, and you use your visual aids in the correct way, and you give your presentation meaning, and then at the end of the presentation you give everybody a presentation handout, then that presentation handout is your opportunity to put down all the details and all the data. Now, firstly, what you're showing here is that you understand how communication works. You're showing that you can manage communication and you're managing your presentation. So you're using visual aids to do exactly what they should do, and you're using documentation to give a handout. And again, with handouts these days, we've got such wonderful software available to us, and there's more and more coming onto the market. You can produce a wonderfully produced and beautifully designed handout to complement your presentation. Now, the advantage with handouts is that people don't have to take in all the information on the handouts in a certain time and space. When you're giving the presentation, this is in a certain time and space. You're given a room, you're given a certain time frame, and you have to give the presentation in that time frame. And you have to design your information so that it works in that time frame. If you're given a handout, then people can use their own time and space in order to take in the information in that handout. So in many ways, the amount of information that you're giving on the handout is limitless. And people can read the document. They can read it on the plane going home, or they can read in their living room at home, or they can read part of it today and they can read part of it tomorrow. Or if they go back to it tomorrow, they can think, well, I didn't understand that yesterday, and I can go back over this. It's totally professional. and you're giving everybody the information that they need in the correct format. Now, one of the answers that you get from people sometimes in companies is that you say, well, the visual aids and the presentation are two separate lots of documentation, and you should be using them in that way. Then people often say to you, yes, that's all very well in theory, but in practice, I simply don't have the time to do that. Now, my answer to that is, well, do you have the time not to do it? I think in every situation, you deserve to take every chance, and you need to look as professional as you possibly can, and you need to communicate in the best way possible. Some presentations are critical. A pitch presentation is basically a presentation in which you sell something. And in pitch presentations in the advertising industry, you're selling creative ideas. And you're often in competition with other companies. Now, if there's 7 pitch presentations on one day and you're presenting to a big client, and the client sees all 7 presentations on one day, it could be that all the creative ideas are very interesting to the client. But actually giving a great presentation and using visual aids in the best way possible, and then giving a wonderfully designed handout, could be the difference between you winning and losing the business. Okay, so let's come on to the next question, and that is, should every visual aid lead to the take-home message? Well, this is linked in a little way to my next question, so let's talk about messages. I think when you're preparing visual aids, you should certainly think about not too many. Now, if we go back to the situation I talked about at the beginning of this talk, and I talked about 250 slides, that is clearly too many. There's too much information going on. If somebody asks me to help them with their presentation, and I walk into the room and I'm expecting them to give the presentation, then they say, yes, but can you go through my presentation slides? And there's a pile like this. I kind of already know that there's something wrong. If somebody gives me 180 presentation slides or visual aids, and then I ask them, well, how long do you have to present? And they say, well, 20 to 25 minutes. Then my answer to that is, well, think about it. That means that you're putting a slide up every few seconds or so. That means there's going to be too much information for people to be taking in. Now, I would always argue that one of the first things that I would think about in any presentation is, what is the message? What's the take-home message? What is it that I want people to take home with them? So in designing my content and designing my visual aids, what I'm trying to do is build up to that take-home message. So I don't think there's an argument that in every case that every visual aid has to lead to the take-home message, but maybe every visual aid has to have some kind of message. It has to add something to your presentation and in some way be taking you along the road and to the destination that you want to be going to. Okay, so let's come on to the next question. When you prepare a presentation, when should you prepare the visual aids? Well, in some ways this is personal, and it depends on the way that you work. And I'll talk about the way that I work in a little bit, because that works for me. But what I would say is that sometimes I'm a little bit confused by the approach that people take to preparing their visual information. So some people, they hear the word presentation, and one of the first things they do is they go along to their computer and they start preparing presentation slides. Now, I find this really confusing, because if you're just preparing slide after slide after slide, it seems to me that there's no direction in the presentation. And in extreme situations, some people, as I say, they will ask me to come and help them prepare their presentation, and it's the night before a big presentation, and I ask the person to give the presentation, and they just show me their presentation slides. So they've spent all their time in preparing the presentation, in preparing presentation slides, rather than thinking about the message of their presentation, and practicing their presentation and getting feedback on their presentation. This seems to me not the right way to go around things. So maybe I should talk a little bit about the way that I work. So the first thing that I would do when I'm given a presentation is, first of all, I'd look at the presentation. I'd look at the context. I'd think about who is the presentation to, where am I giving this presentation, and why am I giving this presentation. Maybe I have the opportunity to come up with my own title for the presentation, and I would think about that. This is certainly linked to the final message that I want to give people. And sometimes you're actually given a title for your presentation. But what I do then is spend a long time thinking about my take-home message. So what is the message that I want people to go away with when they finish listening to my presentation? Now, when that's clear to me, then I can start thinking about the content of my presentation. Now, I'm quite lucky in my presentations. I have quite a long time for preparation. People don't always get that time. I think about the topic, I do research on the topic, and I have lots and lots and lots of notes. I'll have notes on my computer, notes on my phone. I tend to make lots and lots of paper notes, and they're everywhere. And then it gets to a point, and then I start thinking about that content, and I think about how the content is going to fit in the time frame that I've been given. So if I've been given half an hour, 30 minutes to present, then I'll think about what kind of content is going to work in that 30 minutes. And I'll try and put some kind of structure into the presentation, put the presentation together, and think about the content that's going to come into the different points of my presentation. Now that's the point where I start beginning to think about visual aids. And I think about the visual aids, as I said before, that can give an extra dimension and help me with the message that I'm giving. Now, I don't, first of all, get onto a computer program or onto any kind of software. What I do then is I start making little storyboards. Now, if you don't know storyboards, they're something like this. They come from the film industry. They're also used a lot in the advertising industry. I find that they help me a lot. Now, they're a little bit like a cartoon strip. And what I think of is in each little picture, I start thinking about what's the visual aid that I want to use at that point in the presentation. Now, in order to use this kind of technique, you certainly don't have to be a great artist. I'm certainly not. You can use little stick people and little diagrams, and you can try and show that what you want to be showing. Now, when I've got an idea of that, then I will start going away and I'll start trying to put together the visual aids according to the storyboard that I've done. And then if you've got that luxury as well, what I'll often do is print up the visual aids, and I'll put the visual aids up onto a Metaplan board in the order that they'll come in the presentation, and I'll put them in my office, and every time I come into the office I can see the visual aids and I can see the story that I'm trying to give. And I just begin to get an idea of whether the visual aids are going to be working or not. And then of course I'll go out and practice the presentation and get some kind of feedback. So in this process, I would encourage the use of storytelling, thinking about this idea of what's the story that I'm telling through my presentation, trying to link up the story that's coming along with my visual aids. I would think about pictures. Pictures are visual. Pictures will say a lot more than 100 graphs or 100 lots of detail and written words will say. If you put lots and lots of details on your presentation and you put lots of words onto the presentation, what you're doing is you're providing the person who's listening with a conflict of communication. So if somebody puts a lot of words onto a visual aid, the first thing I'm going to do is read those words. And research will tell us that if people have this choice, most people will choose to read rather than to listen. So what the presentation then becomes is some kind of reading exercise where I'm looking at the slides and I'm reading and I'm not listening to the presenter. And again, at this moment, if you're a presenter, you're kind of losing your power as a presenter. So think visually, and think in this regard, think about pictures, think about very simple diagrams, and come back to this idea of clarification once again. So let me give you an example. So if I talk about melting ice caps since 1980, well, one of the things I could do is show this graph. Now, if I look at this graph, it's got information. Maybe I'm an expert on the environment and it's instantly understandable to me. But to most people, it's not instantly understandable. I have to spend, even if it's only a few seconds, I have to look at this visual aid and spend some time trying to understand it. And if the presenter is a good presenter and they're showing this kind of information, they will spend some time trying to explain what the diagram is all about, what the horizontal axis is, what the vertical axis is, and what the line represents. And that will give me some time to get to terms with the diagram. It's a little bit boring. A picture could be more dramatic. And I haven't taken a very difficult picture to find in this instance. So here I've got this picture. It instantly tells a story. It tells the story of the melting ice caps. It's slightly emotional because you've got that ha-ha effect with the polar bear. Maybe I could have found a better picture, but this would work fine. And instead of going through all these different statistics on the graph, I've taken one big number, 50%, and used that number. So since 1980, the ice caps have melted and we've lost 50% of our ice caps. Now this can help you much more as a presenter than giving, as I say, all these details on the slides. Another thing that people do is, and it often comes from this thing of getting on your computer and preparing slides. People often, they bang out a lot of words and they use very stereotypical pictures and little bits of clip art in their presentations. Now, one of the things that you can really strive to be original with is with your visual aids. You can really be creative. You can really hit at home with the people who are listening. Again, if you're in an exam presentation, and I've been in this situation, and you've listened to 10 presentations during the day, and all the visual aids have been really uninspiring, and then somebody comes in with something different, well, the person has scored good marks and good grades without really having to say very much at the beginning. This is a presentation that when you get to the end of the day that you will remember for many of the good reasons. So one of the things you can do with photographs as well is don't only rely on the internet. I mean, you can't probably travel out to the ice caps and start taking photographs, but you can use photographs of your company, of your colleagues, of your peer groups, of your working situation, the town that you live in, the shopping centre where you do your shopping, the weather, your working environment, your home office, your desk, and so on and so on and so on. Sometimes you can use very personal photographs, and using personal photographs really helps people to kick into you as a person and to get to know you as a person. And I'd like to give you a quick example here, and this is one that I did use. And I was asked to give a presentation at a conference asking what I would update in a presentations book that I wrote some years ago if I were to write that book again. And one of the things that I said that I would talk about much more is the issue of storytelling. And I talked about storytelling. Now, when I think of storytelling, what I often think about is my grandmother. I was very close to my grandmother, and I described my grandmother, and I described her home, and I described my grandmother telling us stories. And I showed the audience this photograph. And this is me and my grandmother. Now, I thought a long time about, I was going to a conference, I knew there was a lot of people going to be in my talk, And I really thought about, do I want to give information as personal as this? This photograph means something to me, and I was very close to my grandmother, and do I want to give this information? And in the end, I decided, well, practice what you preach, let people know you and see you a little bit as a human being, and I showed them this photograph. Now, the thing about this was that I got really strong feedback about this one photograph. People contacted me after the presentation was over, and they said, you know, I liked your presentation, I appreciated your presentation, but the bit I always remember is the story of you and your grandma and that photograph that you showed us. So visual aids can be used in a really powerful way. And people will get my message because I talked about the importance of storytelling. They will connect that memory to storytelling, and they'll think about using storytelling themselves. Visual aids are your chance to get creative. It's your chance to be original. Can you do something that's different to everybody else? Can you do something that's really memorable? Now, some people, when I say these things, they say, but I'm not creative. Every single one of us is a creative. Think about the medium that you're using. Are you going to be presenting in a huge room with lots and lots of people listening to you? Are you going to be presenting to a small group? Are you going to be presenting using the online platforms? Now, again, I could give you an example of this. During the COVID pandemic, we had to work online for nearly 2 years, and we had to do a lot of presentation assessments by getting people to give online presentations rather than giving live presentations. Now, I can remember one student who will be nameless, and it was the 4th semester of English, and she got very good grades all the way through, but she was very shy, very reserved. Spoken communication was not her strong point. And when we practiced presentations, I really began to think, well, this is one exercise where her grades might not be so good. Now, I'll always remember her presentation because what she did was go away and she really thought about presenting online. And what she did during the presentation was use one slide or one visual aid. And during the presentation, it was a beautifully crafted presentation. And she used the slide in order to build up one picture during the presentation on that one slide. And it was really, really, really effective. And she got the best grade possible. Now, this is what I think about when I think about, well, don't prejudge things. Really try and be creative and think of something different and let ideas go around your head. Think about things in terms of design. Presentation, I often feel, in business, sometimes we have to move away from the logical and the rational. And sometimes in business, maybe presentations are the nearest some people come to an art form that they ever come to in their business lives. Yes, the logical and rational certainly has a place, but don't forget the other side, the creative side and the artistic side as well. Coming on to the next question then, considering the fast changes in technology, can you imagine that the use of visual aids will change in the near and the far future? Well, a few years ago, it was all about PowerPoint. And in some ways, to me, it was kind of astonishing that things didn't change very much from PowerPoint. PowerPoint has got many more features now than it used to have. And I really think, if you think about all the things that I've said about visual aids, I really think there's nothing wrong with PowerPoint. It's okay, it's fine. It's the way that people use PowerPoint very often that's wrong. They use PowerPoint as a documentation tool rather than thinking of it as a presentation tool. And nowadays there's lots and lots of other software. There's lots of things that you can use. And it's changing all the time. I think as well, we shouldn't think about the simple things sometimes. I've seen really good presentations given with just the use of one flip chart. I think this is really good. If you're good and you can draw very quickly, or you've got very good handwriting, which I certainly don't have, you can use the flip chart and you can use that to present to a small group of people. We shouldn't think sometimes about using an object. I'd like to talk about this pen. Objects can be very powerful, and again, you have to think about the size of your audience. Objects can be very effective online sometimes. We should also think that technology is changing. We should be open to technologies. Think about the things that are there and available for us to use. Sometimes you don't have to use anything. There's many a good TED Talk where people haven't used visual aids at all. And in the future, who knows how we'll be presenting. I think as human beings we'll always be presenting information. We need skills in presenting. We need some input in helping us to present information. But I've always said, well, maybe one day we'll be presenting and we'll have holograms in the room that help us to present. So this brings me on to my final question, and this is thinking about English as a global language. Do you think it's acceptable to have spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes on slides? I certainly believe that English is a global language, and I think that English is open to many varieties. But I think making spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes on your visual aids is simply not acceptable. It's distracting and it looks really unprofessional. So if I see a slide and there's lots and lots of words up there and I start looking at the words and I think, well, there's a grammar mistake there and there's a spelling mistake there and there's a spelling mistake there. Again, I'm listening, but I'm not listening. I'm reading and I'm looking at the mistakes and I'm thinking about the mistakes, and those mistakes have a reflection on the presenter. There are so many opportunities for you to check your visual information. You can use a spell check and a grammar check on your computer or on your software. You can get, if you're not very happy using that or you don't have the opportunity to use that, then you can get feedback from other English speakers about your slides. Again, it relates a lot to what I've said before. The more words that you put on the slides, the more people will read and not listen to you. And the more words that you put on the slides, the more it will be that people will probably be reading your slides, not listening to you, and you'll have more mistakes on your slides. So if you tend to use pictures and you use visual information, you'll have fewer and fewer words in any case. So don't think that visual aids have got nothing to do with English. They've got everything to do with business English. Learning about business English is learning about business communication, and presentations are certainly one of those means of business communication. And using presentation and knowing how the communication works and using it in the best way possible to achieve what you want to achieve with the presentation means that you're giving a good presentation. And designing and thinking about your visual aids and putting a lot of effort into your visual aids will really help you to communicate giving a presentation. It will show people that you care and that you're really managing your presentation. I've always maintained, and I've maintained this for a very long time, that a B1, a lower intermediate learner of English, can give a really good presentation because they design their presentation well, they really design their visual aids, and they give me a presentation that really gives me a message and that I remember. A native speaker might have really good English, but they might give me a presentation that is badly designed, has too much information on the visual aids, is badly structured. Really, I leave the presentation having no idea of what the take-home message is, and all in all, I don't really understand what the whole presentation was about. So use presentation in the most effective way possible. So this is to get you thinking about visual aids. That's all I wanted to say in this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.